Welcome to On the Trail. I'm Steve Evans. If you take a look around, you're going to notice that today is not ideal backpacking weather. It's actually pouring rain, it's cold, and it's extremely windy. Today is actually the type of day where I'd recommend bringing additional shelter on top of your rain gear, as opposed to something like this, like a poncho tarp, which I would use as both my shelter and my rain gear. So you're probably asking yourself, why would I bring additional shelter? That's going to add weight to my backpack. And it will, unless of course you follow these simple steps that I'm going to show you, and you're going to get one of these. This is a 51-gram Cuben Fiber Tarp. It measures 52 inches wide by 110 inches long, which I would consider to be a full-size tarp for a single person. So let's go see how I made it. For this particular tarp, it's just going to be a standard rectangle. 4 yards actually. I want to order a little bit of extra just in case we make a mistake of Cuben fiber. We're going to need, let's say, 4 feet of the grosgrain. We're going to need some thread, which is pretty standard when you're sewing something. And we're also going to need some high sol adhesive, which I'll go into later on. When you've received all your materials, you're ready to really get started. Now, to cut your Cuben fiber, which is the first step you're going to take in the actual manufacturing process, I find that the easiest way to do it is to use a self-healing pad, an X-Acto knife, and a straight edge of some sort. The first thing I'm going to do is measure out 5 inches and cut a 5-inch strip off the bottom or the end of the tarp. And the reason why I'm going to do this is this going to allow me to cut triangles out of this and use them as reinforcements on my tie-up points. Next thing you're going to want to measure is the length of your tarp. So what I've done is I've measured 110 inches to this point here. I'm going to cut it using my straight edge again. So what you need to do first is cut 5-inch by 5-inch squares out of the 5-inch strip. So let's start at the beginning here. So once you've cut out your 2 5-inch squares, you're going to want to cut each one into 4 triangles. And this is so that the hypotenuse is going to be 5 inches long. Now these are pretty small reinforcement points for a tarp. So depending on what you're planning to use your tarp for, depending on what the weight of the materials or the strength of the material, maybe you want to go bigger. But for this tarp, which is supposed to be super ultralight, we're going to go as small as possible. When you complete the first square, you're going to have 4 triangles, and it's going to be 5 inches along the longest length. You're going to repeat the same steps for the other 5-inch square, and that's going to give you, or myself, the 8 reinforcement points for my tie. With all the cutting out of the way, it's time to start the fun part, which is bonding the reinforcement points to the main tarp. What you need for this process is, first and foremost, a 2-part adhesive made by Loctite or High Sol. U09FL. You can get this from McMastercard down in the States, or Fastenal up here in Canada. That's where I bought mine. Costs, I think, about maybe $10, $15. And my experience, it's been great for bonding Cuben fiber. You're going to need a scrap piece of paper, a sponge or a paintbrush, some tape. You're going to need your reinforcement points, and a couple of toothpicks to mix the adhesive. With that said, let's get started. So here we have the corner of the tarp, and you're going to notice that when you buy your Cuben fiber, there's actually a small section about, let's say, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch on the very end where there is no fibers in it. So this part you're not going to want to incorporate in any of the structural areas of your tarp. So what you want to do is you want to unfold it so it lays flat. So this here we have the corner of our main tarp piece of material. The first thing you're going to want to do is slip a piece of scrap paper below the end. We place the reinforcement point on it, but not on the area that is not reinforced. We leave that there. Then you take your tape. You cut a piece of tape long enough to span the area. And you're going to tape it to the tarp, but not on the reinforcement point, just along the hypotenuse of the triangle, just about right there. And this is also going to tape the tarp down to your scrap piece of material, and you're going to be able to remove your reinforcement point. So with the reinforcement point ready to be bonded onto the main tarp, you're going to want to take your adhesive, mix a little bit on a scrap piece of paper, and use your toothpick in order to mix it after. So mix it up on your brush, and you're going to now paint it onto the section where you're going to put your reinforcement point. Hopefully at this point it's going to become self-explanatory why you put this piece of tape here. One, it's going to hold the material down because you're going to see that it's going to want to, the material is going to want to stick to the brush. And two, you're not going to have to worry about trying to do a straight line because you're going to peel that off after. So, with all the adhesive on the area where you want to apply the reinforcement point, you're actually going to take your reinforcement point and put it exactly along there. Line the top edge of this along the very bottom edge of the tape. Make sure do not put the reinforcement material over top of the tape, or else obviously you're not going to be able to get the tape off. So once that is on there pretty good, you're going to want to remove the tape so it doesn't dry right to the material. You're going to want to let that dry. Now I think it says it's a 10-minute work life, so after about 10 minutes you're not going to be able to move it. Now you're going to want to give it probably a day to dry. Repeat this process in every section or area where you want a tie-up point, because wherever you're going to put this is where you're going to sew your grow grain strap to, and the material is a little bit too thin to take it, so we're going to beef it up just like that. Once all 8 of those are done, I'm going to let this dry for overnight, and then we're going to sew. So again, we're going to focus on the corner reinforcement point, and the reason for this is because it incorporates both the edges, and there's slightly different technique for each of them. Earlier, you're going to remember that I mentioned the slight piece of material on the edge here that does not have any reinforcement fibers. Well, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to fold it over once, increase it, and fold it over again. Now this can get a little bit tricky because the length is a little bit long, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And when you get that, okay, run the seam on this side all the way to the end of the tarp out there. Then start on the other side. Okay, you're going to see that Cuben fiber is highly susceptible to creasing, so that when you do run this out there, it's going to hold that crease somewhat anyway. And when you go to sew, it's going to be a little bit easier to follow along the lines. You're going to want to do this all the way around the tarp. When you're completed putting the creases on all the edges of the tarp, it's going to look something like this. Remember, this is on all 4 edges. Keep these creases as best as you can, and go ahead and start sewing along here. This is going to really reinforce the edges and eliminate any type of tearing or premature failure of the material.